Anyway, so let me see. What do I say? I know I have to read a script. It's embarrassing that a man of my powers. This is Jason Kolker, sometimes known as Oslo. I'm interviewing Robert Arber on September 13th at the Marfa Public Library movie theater. Robert, where to begin? You were my first interview when I had no idea why I was doing it, and now you are my latest interview. In that first one, we talked about art a lot, but I didn't ask you much about yourself that first time. But the main question is, how did a guy like you, who is so cosmopolitan that he spent quality time with Andy Warhol, end up in Marfa TX, and seemingly happily so, and you've been here a while?
Well, I came because of Judd, and I came down here as a tourist in, well, maybe 88 or something, 87, 88, and met Judd's assistant at that time, Ellie Meyer, Ellie Madrid, who lives here. She asked me what I did. I mean, they didn't have tours at Chinati like they do now. It was very casual. Somebody showed up. Ellie would show them around. She asked me what I did, and I said I was a printmaker. And she said that Judd wanted to set up a print shop and explain. Well, she asked me who I had worked with, and I gave her a little, just standing there, resume. So from that, I met Judd. I made actually a formal presentation in front of the Chinati board, which was a little intimidating because I don't do that. And these are like, very powerful people in the art world and internationally. I think there were about 6 of them at that time. Anyway, I made the presentation to set up a print shop on the foundation grounds. And it was kind of funny because I made this formal presentation. There were a couple of other people that had to make presentations. I mean, these people were all sitting around a table. So I gave the presentation as to how much it would cost to buy the equipment, set it up, a general idea. And there were no questions. So I stood up and they said, "Thank you." And then Judd said, "That is really a nice belt buckle." And I walked out, and I thought, well, that didn't go well. 2 or 3 weeks later, I got a check in the mail for the amount of money that I thought it would take to set up a print shop, and I did.
And what year is that?
I would have to go back and really think about that, but I would say 87 or 80, well, maybe 88 or 89.
And were you married at the time to Valerie?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take that as a segue to go back to a time when you had come back from Vietnam and you were in the Marines or something? Submarines. And, well, let me just preface this by saying, your story is unusual. Okay.
But first, let me correct you. I was not in Vietnam. I was on a submarine during the Vietnam era.
Okay, you were a participant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, here's what I was going to drive at. You were a very liberal, almost pacifist guy. Where do you come from?
Well, when I went in the Navy, I was living in Ohio.
Okay, so this is the story I've made for you in my mind that seems so interesting. You're kind of this liberal pacifist guy.
So I don't need to say anything.
Well, you're going to tell me if I'm wrong. You don't need to say anything.
I'll come back in a half hour.
And you kind of grew up in the Midwest, and you come back from wearing a uniform and being in the submarines, and then you go to New York City and hang out with Andy Warhol. So
right.
You tell
you have a good memory.
You tell your version.
That's the correct version.
Well, how did that happen? How'd you get from Ohio to the military? How'd you get from the military to New York City, to the art world? How did that all happen?
Well, I was going to school in Ohio and studying, not formally but informally on my own, studying art. I read a lot about art. I had a real love for it, although I was studying philosophy. I wasn't actually... The school that I went to didn't have an art department. The original school I went to. And actually, what I ended up kind of like not going to classes and hanging out at the art school. There was a really good art school in Cleveland. So most of my friends were at the art school. I hung out there, and on my own was reading a lot about art history. Therefore, I knew about Warhol, and David Smith was a real fan. So anyway, after since I wasn't taking enough hours to keep my student deferment, so that was at a point where they had a draft. Mm-hmm. So I got they had a lottery for the draft, and I got I can't remember if it was a high number or a low number, but I can't remember if it was high was good or low was good, but I got whatever it was. I was going to be drafted for sure. So I didn't want to be drafted. I didn't want to go to the jungle and get shot at. So I enlisted, and I enlisted in the Navy, and then once I was in the Navy, I chose submarine school because you had options. And since at that point, I was an enlisted man, but at that point, I'd already had 4 years of college, which, for an enlisted person, that was a bit unusual. So they gave me what was really a good school, which is submarine school. It was a little bit intellectual, and it was, it was a choice thing to get submarine school.
But when you went in, what was the year?
65-ish.
Okay, when you went in 65, had you kind of already developed your political views?
Probably.
Mm-hmm. And certainly when you came out, you had developed some political views. Yeah. And then instead of going back to Ohio, back to the farm, the art farm, granted, but, it's Ohio, you went to New York City.
No, I didn't go, and I didn't live there. I was, at the time, when I was discharged from the Navy, I was in Philadelphia, and that's where they discharge you. They have a facility there where you all go, and I had a top secret clearance, which you have to have on a submarine. So they do, debriefing sounds funky, but you have to go through this whole deal to get discharged. So I was just spending several months there during this discharge procedure, and so I went from Philadelphia to New York. Was a short hop. So I would go to New York and just kind of hang out, and I'd have to come back to do my military stuff. But I didn't live in New York.
Well, tell me about your life in New York, because, again, this is me telling you your life. I feel like it somehow created the pattern which got you ending up in Marfa.
Well, it certainly, I really saw that I liked that, what was going on in New York. I was going to say lifestyle, but that I really wasn't involved deep enough to see it as a lifestyle. But I knew that this was what I wanted to do.
Art-wise, we're speaking.
Yeah.
And what exactly did you? Would you just wandered around town? How did you connect with the people who are now seem so elite and famous that no one would have been able to connect with them unless they were a glitter-wearing transvestite?
Well,
which you were not.
Well, I think I went into the Andy Warhol owned a bar called Dom, D-O-M, and I went in there, just walked in, and I had my sailor suit on. And I knew Andy Warhol owned that place. And so I don't know if he saw me or I saw him, but he asked me to sit at his table. And I think he liked my sailor suit. And at the time, the Velvet Underground was playing. That evening, John Cale and Nico and Lou Reed.
Yeah. Well...
and I was in love with Nico anyway.
Yeah, who wasn't? I was thinking to myself, this is the one time where we fail ourselves by not having a movie camera here, because I was flipping out when you said that. And I feel like we could do a whole interview about that. But since it's about you and not about the Velvet Underground or Andy Warhol, let me kind of turn the question around. How was Andy Warhol an influence on you, and how much time did you spend with him? Obviously, the guy made prints. You know.
Well, yeah, I never went to the factory. I didn't really spend that much time with him. I think they probably have a misconception there. I just essentially met him. And I had, at that time, there was a lot of anti-war stuff going on, and a lot of universities closed. And there was a university, or I guess it was university. It was called the Free University, and I don't know much about it, in New York. And there was some posters, which I got two of them. Two of these posters, and at the bottom of it, there was a cockroach, and it said, "The roach will endure." And it was it was fairly big. I mean, the cockroach size was maybe 2 inches by 3/4. I mean, wasn't little. It was on the poster. And I had it in my hand, and Warhol saw that, and he really liked this cockroach. And the text was, "The roach will endure," because cockroaches can take like 8 times the radiation of a human, and they're survivors. So when the human race is gone, the cockroaches will still be here. So Warhol really liked it. So he signed that to me.
Do you still have it?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I do.
Dinner's on You. So another guy who was there. Do you get that context?
I did.
You're a wealthy man now.
Yeah.
I guess we're turning the software off. Say this. Now it's running. So I told Tom. I sent an email to Tom Michael today because Apple's at an all-time high, and I said, Apple @ all-time high, and then the body of the text said, "Dinner on You." And Tom Michael sent me back an email saying, Tuesday, cochineal, drinks or dinner. So I say to you, you have assigned Andy Warhol "The Roach Will Survive."
Endure, yeah.
And I say to you, "Dinner's on You," and your response is?
I don't know why, because you think that the poster the signed thing is worth some money, which I guess it is. But I would have to sell it, just like Tom Michael would have to sell his stock in order to buy you dinner. I think dinner should be on you because I'm spending...
What you've told me is you think further ahead than Tom Michael. Because, Apple stock is going to go down before that Andy Warhol print will go down, too.
Yeah.
In any case, this is what I pick up, and I'm kind of drawing influences, but you're a printmaker, and you're a good one, and you have influences from New York, Donald Judd, and so I'm wondering if I'm reading too much by saying that maybe when you got back from the military and you hung out there and you met among the first famous printmakers, multiple duplicate printmakers, if that was the lasting impression of Andy Warhol on you.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. But he really wasn't anywhere near the first. If you go back in history, I mean, Degas and lots and lots of 1900s.
The Art Nouveau guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've made prints for, hundreds of years. I mean, and it's a very democratic process. So you can do this, you can do prints which typically or theoretically should be inexpensive for the people.
Good point. Okay. And we'll get back to printmaking in a bit, because that's how I met you, actually, which you don't know about. But there was another guy in New York who was doing cool work which was not nearly as famous, and that's Donald Judd. And is that when you heard of him, or?
Sure, I'd heard of him. Yeah, of course I'd heard of him. But then I moved from when I left the Navy and got out of there. I went to northern New Mexico and hung out in northern New Mexico. Was a hippie.
Like Taos style northern?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I'm telling the listener, there might be a listener hundreds of years from now, but Taos and hippies were immortalized together in Easy Rider, I think.
Yeah, well, I would say that was, yes, okay.
Okay, well, but I'm just saying, if you want the visual representation of what that was like communes, hippies. It was a really new and frightening way of living.
Frightening?
Frightening to Middle America.
Oh.
It was the idea that you guys don't need the old way. You don't need 2 cars and 2 TVs and stuff.
That's right.
So how did you end up in New Mexico?
And women didn't need underwear.
How did you end up in New Mexico as after this kind of inoculation of cool art?
I had a friend that I went to undergraduate school with when I studied philosophy, and he, in the same era of me, I mean, he was the same age as I am, was also concerned about being drafted, so he became a pacifist. And there was a lot of movement for trying to be a pacifist. Ed, my buddy, was truly a pacifist. There were a lot of people trying to be pacifists so they could get out of the draft, but and there were a lot of other ways that people tried to get out of the draft, like move to Canada, lots of different ways. But Ed moved to northern New Mexico, and he got, which was very rare in that era, he got a, I forgot what it was classified as, but he was declared a pacifist by the government.
Conscientious objector.
That's the word. Thank you. Yeah, that's the word. It escaped me.
Okay, and he was out, and you went to visit him.
I went to visit him, and ended up staying with him.
What was that like? I mean, that
was
is
one of the best times of my life.
Yeah.
I'm having a good time in my life right now, too, but that was enlightening. And it had very little to do with the big picture of contemporary art, but there was a lot of art being done. Ed, my buddy, drew every day. And Ed was truly a conscientious objector, a pacifist. And then he went into, he joined this unusual order, religious order. It was called the Brotherhood of Man. It wasn't, I presume it was Christian in roots, but it was just to go to like Skid Row places and help people. So it was nothing. He became a brother. He wasn't a priest, but I don't even know if they have priests in this order. But he just helped people, and he was truly deep in his heart. He was one of the most beautiful people I've ever met. But he drew every day, and when he joined the order, he had to get rid of absolutely every earthly possession he had. And I end up, and I have it, his drawing book.
Wow. Is he alive?
I'm sadly I don't know the answer to that. I didn't keep up with him. I was showing the book to somebody recently, and it's gorgeous. It's a big drawing book.
Do you draw yourself? I mean, do you have the skills?
Not much. So anyways, he gave me the book, and another thing he gave me is that his girlfriend, there's a guy named William Bailey, well-known even now in New York, artist, figurative artist, and Ed's girlfriend was a model for Bailey. And Bailey gave Nancy a drawing, and she was the model, and Ed couldn't keep that. I mean, that was part of it. So I have a William Bailey drawing that is just beautiful, actually.
And so,
and I took his two cats.
What then with the two cats, armed with the two cats? What took you away from New Mexico?
Oh, I didn't. At that time, I applied to the University of New Mexico, and I was accepted there, and got an undergraduate degree in sculpture, and then from that, I applied to the Tamarind Institute, which is the premier printmaking organization in the country. It's the only institute that teaches printmaking. There are a lot of universities, that trains printers. There are a lot of universities that have classes in printmaking, but those are typically classes where you take your image and make prints, just like you would take a painting class. But the Tamarind Institute is the only place that trains printers.
I want to continue with your history, but I want to interject one question before I forget it. It seems to me, having 3 years of knowing printers and knowing what prints mean and how they're done and so forth, that it's kind of a zen in the art of archery business. The skill of printing is not necessarily knowing the facts of how to print. It is doing it so frequently and so many times that you know every mistake, and that you do it by feel rather than by knowledge. Meaning, the printing seems to be. I'm trying to. I was just reading about this. Maybe it was Zen in the Art of Archery, where this guy shoots a bow so many times that he has stopped thinking about shooting a bow, and he's just kind of like looks at the target and lets this ritual happen, which turns into a bullseye.
I think that's how that works. It works like in ping pong. I like playing ping pong. If you start thinking, you don't do well.
Yeah.
But if you're not really thinking about, oh, I'm going to do this shot or that shot, and it's true in printmaking. But there's another part of it. That's the technical part. The part that's really most interesting and what makes a really good printer is the collaboration. So you meet an artist, you have to figure out what they want to do. So it's that interpersonal rapport that you develop with an artist is really the key to a good printmaker. I mean, you can be technically proficient, but you just don't know how to translate what they're thinking of or how to offer some thoughts that you have to them.
Right.
So it's the collaboration, which is really the key to printmaking.
Okay. Well, do you mind bouncing around?
Mm-mm.
I want to go from the school in New Mexico to Valerie Arber to Arber and Sons here in Marfa, Texas. So when are you in school? They're probably around 1970-ish?
Yeah, probably.
Were you riding motorcycles back then?
Since I was a teenager.
Oh, well, let's talk about that a second.
Sure.
So I know for you a motorcycle is a thrill because it's fast and it's open, but it's also an aesthetic thrill. You love the way motorcycles look. When did that all start?
Well, I got my first motorcycle, and it's the only motorcycle that I ever sold. So I've got a dozen or more motorcycles. And I sold one, and I sold that to get money to go on a honeymoon.
Oh.
But they are very beautiful things. They are just a gorgeous object in my mind. Not all of them, of course, but the ones I've got, and there are others that are more beautiful than any that I've got. But it's just an engine and two wheels, and it's like the most essence of transportation.
Is it based on a square or a triangle? Because I see it as both.
Well, the frame is triangular.
Right.
And the square, I'm not sure where you...
I get the square from, if you draw a picture, from handlebars down to the bottom front wheel, then along the ground, the earth, and then up from the back wheel to the seat, and then another angle going straight across from seat to gas tank. And so you can draw a square around it, and yet it's basically, if you look at it, you see triangles. The frame is a triangle.
Yeah.
The frame is two triangles in a sense.
It is.
Yeah.
The subframe, the rear frame, and the main frame. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, on most motorcycles. Some newer ones, they don't do that at all, actually.
Right, and I think they suffer for it. They look like these truncated kind of... Anyway,
well, it's interesting. I mean, that I think there's validity to the beauty of motorcycles. It was the Guggenheim Museum. I'd have to think, but it was probably 10 years ago. Did a show called "The Art of the Motorcycle," and it was in the Frank Lloyd Wright spiral. They had sort of the history of motorcycles, and some of the most beautiful motorcycles. Nothing that you would see typically out there today.
I'm going to ask you which ones you like, but let me save this first just so I know that...
Honda Goldwing.
No, what I was going to say is I knew this guy who in New Mexico when I lived in Santa Fe who was a huge bike rider, and I asked him what he thought about Harleys, and he said, oh, we call Harley riders nature lovers because they're always stopped on the side of the road. And I don't think you have a Harley either.
No, I don't.
So what do you like?
My favorite bike is my first motorcycle, and it's the only one I sold. It's called a Matchless. It's British, and I since have bought one to replace my lost love.
Your first bike was a Matchless? That, as I recall, that was a big World War II bike for the British, correct?
It is British. They did BSA. Actually, was more. They made more BSAs for the military, But Matchless was in there in the
Okay.
mix.
Okay.
Royal Enfield and
So
such.
take me from school, university in New Mexico around 1970 to meeting Valerie Arber, and then we'll zip on over to Martha.
I met her in undergraduate school. And we had this thing. I was in the sculpture department. She was in drawing. She has her degree in drawing. And we did this field trip. Our sculpture class went on a field trip. And there was a woman that was in my class, in the sculpture class. But Valerie came along with her as her buddy. We were there. The field trip was to the Black Hole in Los Alamos, which is a salvage yard. So our professor, who was a great guy, I mean, a real inspiration for me, took the class, which was like maybe 15 people, up to Los Alamos, and we would buy, just stuff in order to make sculpture out of it. And I saw Valerie. And all this other stuff was used, but she didn't appear to be used.
She was worth selling your Matchless for.
I
That's a good compliment.
know.
Yeah. Don't think too much about that. Okay. So she's an artist in her own right. So you're two artists who are pairing up, and I know you have currently a life, both you, in New Mexico. So you love the place and stuck around, and then somehow West Texas gets there.
Well, I don't know if I already said, but I came down to meet Judd. Did I already talk about that?
You said that, but
Yeah.
okay. So, let's talk about Judd's art. When I first met you, one of the things we used to love to talk about is Judd's art, because I didn't get it. I now actually have a really strong appreciation for Judd. Among other things, I realize in life just how difficult it is to make something, period.
Yeah.
And he made a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean art, I mean a foundation and buildings and chairs, all kinds of stuff. And I think philosophy, and I think that's a very powerful recommendation for any person. Not to mention that you said he was the smartest person you'd ever met after knowing me for a year.
No. I said he's the smartest person I ever had a cocktail with. And we were having cocktails at the time, and you took offense.
Yes, I did. So I have, and frankly, this is the value of interviews or talking or conversation is if you keep a certain flexibility to yourself, you can change and you can grow and you can learn. And I have developed an appreciation for Judd, if not all his work, at least the person that I did not have when I first met you. In any case, yes, you came out here and you like Judd, and then you give your presentation to this board. And I'm curious, was Marianne Stockenrun on the board?
No.
This is before she came to town?
Yeah. No, actually, I had met her here with Judd, but she was Judd's girlfriend at that time. But I did meet her with Judd at the block, but she was not involved. I mean, it was Judd it was his doings.
And so
She was a girlfriend.
basically what you were petitioning for or auditioning for was to make Judd's stuff. I mean, it was Chinati as a foundation, but everyone knows that Judd was the ruler of the roost.
Yeah.
And so, what did you start doing of his? Because we know him obviously from boxes, but he did a lot of print stuff as well.
He did a lot of print stuff through his entire history, through his entire life, through his whole artistic life. He made prints, and there's a book on a catalog raisonné of his prints and editions. It's called, and he there's images from college in there that he made prints. But we did a couple of projects. We did a project. I had heard of this show that was being held in Fort Worth, and it was New Mexico artists. Texas artists. And I noticed that Judd wasn't on the list, so I talked to the Fort Worth Museum, and they said, "Well, we just don't think we could." I think that they just thought they couldn't get him into it. I don't know if that's really the case, but so I mentioned it to Judd. So we did a print called the Fort Worth edition, or the Fort Worth print, and it was in that show, and that was probably 90.
Describe the process.
It was a lithograph, and he drew. Well, I would rather talk. I'll tell you about this one, but one that's more clear in my mind is a big project that I did later. But he drew this, and we did this at the print shop. Then, from that, the result of that board meeting, they gave me a check. I bought a printing press. I did.
You didn't have one before?
I did, but they wanted one of their own.
Okay.
And I didn't design it, but I specified it. And then it was custom made, this press.
And that's what you have now?
I have that press now, yeah.
What I meant by the process is not necessarily the process of making the print, but the process of translating from his mind to his words to your ears to your hands.
Well, it's kind of, Judd being really different than any other artist I've ever worked with, a different kind of collaboration. I could just talk about that one, but I'd rather talk more because it's more specific of this project called the Korean project. But anyway, for
either one, yeah, I don't. I mean, same thing. I just want to know how you worked with him.
Okay, the the Fort Worth project was a lithograph, and so he drew out. He said he wanted a rectangle that was 80 centimeters by 60 centimeters on the exterior, 60 centimeters by 40 centimeters on the interior. So we have this rectangle that's with a negative interior space, and then it had lines across it, and it was this cadmium red light, which is a color he really liked, and we worked with. We did that, but then not that long a period after that, we did a project called the Korean project, and that was really interesting and more unique than any other artist I'd ever worked with or since, previous or since. Well, since Judd is known to have people fabricate his work for him, all the aluminum pieces at Chinati, the concrete piece, almost everything, not entirely, but almost everything he did, he had people build it for him. So he would do a drawing or a concept, and then he would turn it over. Well, with the aluminum pieces, he turned his sketches, drawings, over to engineering, and to an engineer who would do engineering drawings, precise drawings. Those precise engineering drawings were sent to a fabricator to be built. With the woodcuts that we did, he wrote out on a piece of paper that he wanted a 60 by 80 centimeter rectangle, and that it would be dissected by a 3 millimeter line. I mean, there are 20 of them, so I'm just sort of generalizing. It would be dissected in thirds with a 3 millimeter line, and then he would specify the color of that vertically, and then there would be a 2 millimeter line that would dissect it horizontally in half. So that was all written out in longhand, and he gave that to me. Now that's worth something. I could sell that at.
Do you recall the story? One time when you actually were, I think, buying me dinner, you were telling me this story about something on a napkin he wrote, which you crumpled up.
Oh, well, yes. That was actually not a napkin, but I was at the block, and he actually probably always had, I don't know, for like an 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, like lined paper. He always had it, and he always started, and I asked Marianne about it, why that was, but he would start a drawing, and he did that drawing with a date and where he physically what was when he did that drawing. So the top would be like 7 October 91, and that actually might be the date, but I'm not sure. And then the location was Manzano di Chinate, or well, anyways, there's a formal name, and I don't think that's it, for the block. Everybody knows it as the block, but that actually does have a formal name that he used. So he wrote that in there, and then we were talking. Well, this is, I hadn't known him for very long, and he was asked me if I ever had Sotal, which I had never had. Is a very powerful alcoholic drink from Mexico, made from the Sotal plant. So he poured it for me, and I took a sip of it, and it was like drinking gasoline. It was not a really pleasant drink. It wasn't like nice bourbon. But anyways, we had a few of them, and then he made dinner. It was just the two of us, and we were talking. He talked about a lot of things that, he was talking about the waste plant in Sierra Blanca, and actually, he was very concerned about it. That was something. One of the things about Judd is, we said earlier how knowledgeable he was. He was very politically aware, too. I mean, he was very politically concerned. And he was very concerned about, they were bringing sludge from New York City to Sierra Blanca, was waste. And he was thought or concerned or had thought that it was a case that it had heavy metals in it. So they would bring this literal sludge in boxcar or flat cars, gondola cars, on the tracks to Sierra Blanca and dump it there. So he really thought that it probably had heavy metals in it. So I offered to jump the fence, get samples of it, and then take it to a lab. Never happened, but and I think they stopped doing that sludge.
Donald Judd was more or less a generation older than you. Was he a mentor of sorts?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was a generation. A generation is what, 20 years?
He would not have been drafted for Vietnam. I don't know what a generation
He
is.
served in Korea.
Right. So,
Yeah.
That's what I mean, though.
Yeah.
He was above the
He was a war ahead of me.
He was a war ahead of you. but that gets to my question. It seems like you did more than worked with him. You learned from the guy, too.
Oh, yeah. No doubt. No doubt. And even though I'd already been printing for, 75, 85, 95, maybe 20 years already before I met him. So I certainly, and I had worked with some renowned artists by that time. But Judd, and this, not only Judd, but all of the most of the artists who I really respect, really have taught me stuff. You teach me stuff.
I don't teach you much.
Just being around you, just seeing how a person thinks, seeing what they have to say. Unless I'm just totally dismiss them, and I want to get the heck out of the room.
If you can learn from me, you can learn from a damp sponge. Talking about Robert, all the people you learn from, when I met you, two people told me you were one of the best printmakers in the United States, maybe the world. And I asked you that. You said, I don't know, it's kind of grumped it off. So my question is who is a better printmaker than you?
Oh, there's lots of them. There really are. And historic printmakers. There's people that maybe are not working any longer.
If you have to go back to the 19th century, that means you are the best printmaker.
There were some great printmakers. One is a guy named Ken Tyler. And he also came out of the Tamarind Institute, like I did. He was in a Tamarind Institute, started in Los Angeles with, at that time, an incredible grant from the Ford Foundation, money-wise. It was like $5 million, unheard of at that time, to revive the art of lithography. Ken Tyler was one of the first students in Los Angeles, and that would have been in 1960-ish, early 60s. And he went on to found Gemini printmaking in Los Angeles, and it was one of the finest printmaking facilities in the country. It still exists, but Tyler has retired. There's a woman also in Oakland, California, Kathann Brown, who does etching. She doesn't do lithography. She's a great printmaker and a great writer. That's one of the things that I don't write much, but Kathann Brown is a terrific writer.
You're given the names of all these print shops. Why are you Arber and Sons? Obviously, you have sons, but I've never seen them working with you.
Well, first it's singular. It's the name on my...
Oh, Arber and Son?
Yeah.
Okay. What's his name?
Amos.
Amos.
Amos Oak Arber.
And I have met him, to be honest with you, but I've never seen him in the print shop.
Well, when I started the shop, it was like 1976, I think, is sort of when I formally started the shop and gave it a name. And I was looking for a name for the shop. And I thought that and my son at that time was like 1 year old. And I just thought it would have substantial quality to it. That Arber and Son sounds like it goes back to
Franklin was your first customer. Or whatever.
So it was just coming up with a name. He helped me some, and when he was going to high school, and but he is now a landscape architect.
Oh, good. You came here for Donald Judd, and you're a print guy, but you stayed here, and you stayed here long after Judd passed away. And you must like something about the place. Why are you still here?
Well, there were a couple of reasons. I had a shop in New Mexico, and coincidentally, or for some reason, well, I know the reason, but I sold the building that I was in New Mexico, my shop. So I was a little bit somewhat homeless in a way. I mean, not literally, but... So I had a box full of money that from selling their place. We didn't want to sell it, and I had it was a wonderful place. It was just north of Albuquerque with 3 irrigated acres, huge cottonwood trees, and an old barn, which was my shop. And that's where I worked with people like Bruce Nauman and Richard Prince and some really well-known people. So somebody wanted to buy the place, and I said I could never be bought. I mean, was my belief that I couldn't be bought? I was wrong. When they put a box full of money on the table, and well, okay. So I came down here. I'd been coming down here, and we bought the building that I'm in now. It's an old movie theater.
You getting out of order, but you've always struck me as, of course, a very pleasant guy, but with a somewhat anti-authoritarian streak in you. And
how true?
How true? And I can't imagine you working for someone else, not well and not long, but it seems like you here in Marfa you've had the freedom and the ability to do your own thing, which may not be the case in Los Angeles or New York.
I would say that's true. I would really consider myself independent of. And I had some employees for a while, but it ended up I had 2 full-time employees, but I really didn't care for it because I ended up managing them, and I don't care to manage. I love to print. I'm my happiest when I'm next to my press, ink on my hands. Well, you're not supposed to have ink on your hands, but
is that an indication you're doing a bad job, that you're sloppy?
Yeah. Yeah, when I was at Tamarind, if you got like a thumbprint, like on the back of the print, there's a good chance you'd get fired.
Wow.
So it is a very clean. You can't the prints have to be clean.
There's a movie I want to recommend to you, right here on this oscilloscope, called Hero Dreams of Sushi. Are you familiar with it? Came out last year, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. It's about the allegedly best sushi chef in the whole world. He's 85 years old. He has a tiny store in Tokyo. Only 10 people can fit in his restaurant. It's in a mall. $300 a person to get in, and he's just this amazing sushi chef. And
you've been there?
No, I've not. I've seen the movie. I mean, for me to get there would be whatever. Yeah. But it's an amazing tale of Japanese mastery. And the way they just they attack it every single day. They do the same thing, and they make a change once every 5 years or 10 years, and that's innovation. And then at the end of their career, Michelin says they're the best in the whole wide world, and it's a very inspiring story. So take a look at that.
I will. I shall.
What's your favorite part of Marfa, Texas in 2012 and versus 1998? Or when did you say you came here? In 1988?
No. 80. I first started coming here in 88, but I didn't have the shop. We bought the building in 98.
Okay, so let's say, just split the difference. In the early 90s, What was your favorite part of Marfa, and what is it now? It can't be the same thing, 'cause the town's changed.
Well, in the early 90, 91, Judd died in 94, I believe. It was all about Chinati and Judd. I mean, I came down here. My shop at that time was in New Mexico, so I would come down here. I would come with proofs to show Judd. He would specify what he needed. I would go back to New Mexico and work on them, and then bring him and show him to him. So during that era, it was entirely about Chinati. There was nothing else in the town that was of interest. There's just nothing else going on. Today, I mean, with the ballroom and the Lannan Foundation, Jason, of course. Things have changed, and for the better, for sure. Mm-hmm. Restaurants,
I remember very fondly. I want to praise your wife, who I love, Valerie, but I remember very fondly Henry. Henry was unique in his species for looking like he was not in his species. He was a dog that looked like he was either from another planet, or just like one of these guys who's been living in a cave his whole life. But he did not look like a dog. And I had a real attachment to him. And he died, how long ago?
Maybe a little over a year.
When did you get him? What's your story?
Well, he was like 12 years old, from the pound. Valerie. He was Valerie's dog. I was just sort of secondary in his life. And I was actually jealous of Henry, because I think Valerie liked him possibly... Well, I can't say more than I.
She told me that. But
he tolerated me. He did not.
She used to walk him all the time
and feed him. So that's one of the keys. Mm-hmm. And she
but
rescued him from the pound.
If you knew Valerie, you knew Valerie and Henry, because you would never see them apart.
Right.
Yeah. But did he come here to Marfa when you guys did?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I mean. She got him in the pound in Espanola. Well, actually, it was Santa Fe, but he was an Espanola dog, which, Espanola. Yeah. So I don't know when she got him, 10 years ago. So, I don't know when that was.
You kind of gave your cards away because you said that things are better in the town now as far as creature comforts, at least. But what would you say is one of the problems if you... had to cite concerns about Marfa? And I bring this up because generally speaking, whenever there's growth, basically people complain just to keep life going on. That's one way we talk to each other. But whenever there's growth in a town...
Through complaining.
Yeah.
That's sad.
If you ever see a comedian, 95% of what they do that we laugh at is the form of a complaint.
I see. Okay.
But that's a different topic for a different time. My question is now... In Marfa, what is a change that you maybe are not thrilled with?
Wow, that's kind of tough. I'll say, and it's not because it's probably that big of a change. It was only because I didn't know of it when I was first here. But it's the politics, the local municipal politics. I'm not too crazy about it.
What are the local municipal politics?
Sadly, it's a non-appreciation of volunteers.
Right.
For one.
Mm-hmm. Editorialized.
Yeah. I think that's a huge mistake, and it's a subject to sort of make me, pissed off. The mistake that they're doing by not utilizing the volunteers that are here, because you have some really special people that have gathered in Marfa in the last 15 years. And I'm sure, and some of them do this, but it's a resource, a pool of people that you could draw from, and I'm sure they would be willing to do it, and many do it, to volunteer and work and make everything even better. The mistake they make is they don't thank you. They don't appreciate it.
You have been in the Marfa Chamber of Commerce, in the Rotary Club. You have represented the animal people, Stump or Rump or whatever. What's it called?
Rump. Romp.
Right, wrong. I mean, you've done a lot of volunteering. Well, I was going to say volunteering has fallen a bit by the wayside, but in a way it fits in because 5 years ago, 10 years ago, volunteering was the only way that stuff would get done.
Uh-huh.
And now the town has more tourists, it's got more money, it's got more businesses. Do you think there's a connection there, that as a town grows in success, the volunteers are less appreciated, maybe?
I don't think that that's true historically.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are a lot of volunteers in New York City, but they're appreciated, and you want to do it. I mean, you'll volunteer for the Natural History Museum or those sort of things. But I also you didn't mention it, but I spend a lot of time working at the swimming pool. I'm the chemist at the swimming pool.
Are you really?
And I got certified. I went. They needed it. They had to have. It's called CPO, Certified Pool Operator, and you need to have a person that has that certificate to keep the pool open, or the health department would shut you down. They didn't have one, so I volunteered. I went online and got this certificate, which was a lot of work, actually. It was, chemistry. And I wasn't that good in chemistry. During chemistry class, there was a pretty girl, and that's who I was paying attention to.
Well, that's chemistry.
You're right. It's just not alkalinity and acidity and those sort of things.
That's compatibility. That's
Yes.
that's advanced chemistry.
Anyway, so I got certified. And so every day during the pool season, I would go at 7 o'clock in the morning and adjust the water. And also swim, because I like to swim.
What time did you say, 7:30?
7 in the morning.
Wow. And do you still do that?
Well, the pool's closed, but I do during the season.
Huh.
Beautiful pool, actually.
5 more minutes. I want to ask you, what kind of art do you like? Obviously, you like Judd stuff, and I know you like Warhol stuff, and I know you like Valerie Arber's stuff. So take those three away. What other stuff do you dig?
Bruce Nauman,
Don't know.
Barry LeVay.
What kind of things do these guys do? Are they representational?
Nauman is an object maker for sure, but he's a really intellectual guy. He does make, and they're parodies. He just finished and was in last week's New Yorker. New Yorker. He is equally as famous as Judd. He had his retrospect at the Museum of Modern Art about 10 years ago, and I've done a lot of prints with him. Not nearly enough. He's still alive. The article that was about is he did this fountain, and somebody asked him to do a fountain. He said, I don't do fountains. But he said, okay. It was a dealer in Chicago. He said, okay, get fish from the Great Lakes and freeze them. So they're like a full, catch them and then freeze them. He then cast there were carp, there were suckers, there were all kinds of fish that were in the Great Lakes, like Michigan, I guess it is on that side. And then he cast them in bronze, and he put these water lines to them, and the water lines come, and then the bronze is like all bronzes, they're hollow in the middle, and he drilled holes in the side of these fish, pumped water into them, but these fish are hanging from the ceiling, and they're probably... The one I saw at his studio, there were only like maybe 15 of them, but it was like a prototype for it. But the piece that's probably in New York probably has 25 or 30 of these fish hanging at different levels. And he does this parody of things. So there's the term fish out of water. Yeah. This is water out of a fish. But this stuff is fantastic. Really, really good stuff.
I should have mentioned this earlier. You live in a movie theater.
Yeah.
You live where you work, right?
Yes.
When was that last showing movies?
Oh, I think it was 1915, early.
Oh.
Really early.
What was it when you got it then?
It had gone through many things. It was when the military base, Fort D.A. Russell, Chinati, when the military base was in operation, the train stopped here. And that whole city block of commercial buildings was bars. And my building was a bar called the Marfa Joy. And all of those buildings were bars. And then it was a hardware store, it was an ice cream parlor. And when I bought the building, it was just used for storage, but the very previous business was a stereo shop. They sold stereos.
One of the recent attractions of Marfa, Texas is the big bar scene. We have a bunch of them now. There was, usually one or zero. And of course, when bars come to town, people adopt bar names.
Yeah.
And yours has been Tyrone. Where does
Right.
that come from?
Oh, it's an old name I've had for years.
And you have...
Tyrone Mars.
Tyrone Mars.
Yeah.
I never even knew the last name.
Yeah.
You have on your arms right now two things that were not on your arms last year. And they seem to be your symbol, much as Prince has a symbol or whatever. What's going on with you? You got two tattoos for your birthday. That's the bottom line. But
A couple days ago.
A couple days ago.
Right.
What's the meaning of the symbols?
Well, it's my chop, and every print that I've ever printed has, the artist signs it, but I put my chop on it as the maker of the print. And it's an old tradition. So this is called a chop, and when you become a master printer, now people can just make up a chop and put it on there, but part of finishing the master printer program is that you design a chop and then it's registered. So there's a book of printer's chops. This chop I designed actually way before I was even a printer. And our last name is Arber, and this is a stylized tree. Arbor means tree.
Oh, arboreal. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the upper half, the branches, and this is the roots.
I see. Wow. But you have it on both arms? Okay.
Yes.
It gives you that Superman appeal.
Yes. I'll tell you, the only other tattoo I have is that cockroach that Andy Warhol liked, and that I got in 1967 or so.
Where's that?
On my foot.
Hmm. Secrets are revealed. Do we have anything more to discuss, Robert?
Well, I guess what you didn't ask is, what am I doing today?
What are you doing today?
I'm actually got two for sure projects in the works, and then a couple of others. I've got this ongoing project called the 30 by 30 centimeter project. That is, I produce a volume, trying to do one a year, but that's sort of falling back. I've done 9 volumes so far. All of the artists have to fit in this portfolio box, which is 30 by 30 centimeters in dimension. So the next one, the 10th one, I may be going to Belgium to print it, to work on it. The artist is actually from Munich, but I really like the idea. I want to do mostly the majority of the prints, the technique, the media is lithography, because that's really what I was trained in. I do wood cuts as well, but linoleum cuts. I would love to do a copper plate etching. I did some in school, but I'm not really, I don't do it on an ongoing basis. And each country has, something I've been thinking about recently, has a tradition in printmaking, in the printmaking media. I think U.S. silkscreen would be, if you had to point to one media that is a tradition of a printmaking media, silkscreen in the United States, lithography in France,
woodcut in Japan,
woodcut in China or Japan, and copperplate etching in the Dutch in the Netherlands, but I'm going to go to Belgium, but. So I want to go there to do this copperplate. It hasn't worked out yet. I've got another project which is really exciting for Lauren Madsen, who was an artist I met that was at the ballroom, in a show at the ballroom. And actually Beyonce bought his piece out of that show. You didn't talk about Beyonce.
I wasn't here for her.
Oh, I was.
And I just feel like she's rejected me nonstop since she's gotten famous.
Oh, well,
Anyway.
that happens. So anyways, Lauren is a really interesting... He was in the show called Digital Dialogues, I believe. It was all about the digital world. And he's an older... He's not as old as I am, but he's an older guy. He's not... You think of digital art as 30-year-olds. The digital world as 30-year-olds. And he's probably in his late 50s, I'm guessing.
Oh, cool.
And he really is a digital artist. So I'm trying to translate this really incredible image that he sent me, which is called Two Shacks, but it's actually It's also been referred to as two cabins. And it's Ted Kaczynski's cabin, the Unabomber, and Henry David Thoreau's cabin. And he's overlaid, the two cabins are very, very similar. They're one-room cabins that the Unabomber lived in and Thoreau lived in. Anyways, he overlaid these two cabins, and there's the relationship and there's some text involved of like Kaczynski, why, him being in the wilderness and Thoreau being in the wilderness. So we're trying to translate a digital imagery into a woodcut.
May I make a recommendation before we go?
I have a couple of projects, but that's okay.
My recommendation is an Arber open house, because I've been in. Remember way back when I paid you the compliment and said I thought you're the outlay. What I don't even know what it's called, but the way you've set up your shop in that theater was as cool to me in the way the tables and lights are done as anything I've seen, on a wall somewhere called art. I thought it was great. I thought it qualified as art, and I think you should have an open house.
I think your living and working space is incredibly important. I mean, you surround yourself. I surround myself with, of course, art on the wall, my equipment, my printing equipment. I have drawers of prints that I've printed, and these motorcycles, because they are very, very beautiful things.
Yeah.
So I like to surround myself with beauty.
And
you will be the exception.
Thank you very much. But let's end it there. Thank you very much, Robert Arber.